The comments made and opinions given by show hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the All One broadcast or its sponsors.
Good evening, and welcome to Beyond the Norm with Chip Reichenthal. This is a show that aspires to reach a deeper truth, help answer our greatest mysteries, entertain new thought and theoretical perspectives in science, metaphysics, paranormal, and other exciting realms. At the same time, on Beyond the Norm, we hope to highlight, feature, and endeavor into what we call the art of nice. As for humanity to truly prosper, each of us is, and can be, a vital part of the greater picture, a collective, harmonic, kind, and civil union that can carry us all into the new age, while building within ourselves a strong and inner peace. Knowledge is power, and a strong and vital element to becoming the best we can be. Your host, Chip Reichenthal, is a published author, veteran radio host with an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and finding the road to answers, or the things that mystify us all. We gladly welcome you to Beyond the Norm with Chip Reichenthal.
All right, good evening, everyone, and a very happy holidays to you all, and welcome to a very special episode of Beyond the Norm. This is your host, Chip Reichenthal, and what a treat we have for you tonight, as our guest is Edwin F. Becker, a brilliant and wonderful man who unknowingly purchased a home back in 1970 that had paranormal activity so fierce it culminated in the first nationally televised exorcism via NBC, no less. Now, here's a really good guy who, along with his beloved wife, Marcia, learned the hard way that they were destined to be a distinct part of our paranormal realm some decades before it was cool to do so or even talk about it. Now, for the sake of upping the cool factor for tonight, or at least the wisdom that we can gain in this hour, is a true paranormal playoff atmosphere, since it's so close to Super Bowl time. For tonight, you have two men entering the program, two men leaving, both smiling, hopefully. Now, first, the host team has a kind-hearted man, me, who entered the realm of paranormal through kind and loving experiences, what with visitations from his childhood best friend at the moment of his death, and post-mortem visits from his mother, father-in-law, and many others, and since 1979 has never had a malevolent encounter, nasty EVP, or bad experience, despite decades in the realm. On the guest team, a kind-hearted man, Edwin F. Becker, who was thrown into the mire of a first home purchase along with his expecting wife and a world of possibility back in 1970, only to find themselves as trespassers to a myriad of spirit activity, and his experiences were almost a perfect opposite of mine. Now, here's a man that endured what had to have been one of the most extreme hauntings of all time, from a home occupied in long-standing manner to a family that, when alive, were outcast, recluse, abusive, perverse, mad, and a few did die in that home, some self-inflicted, some inflicted, or a result of hard abuse. So imagine the energy afterward, especially when they were the first non-family members there since the home was built. And one might think that my optimism in comparison would sound simply and utterly naive after all he endured. Yet I don't think so, considering the man. Now, naturally, we would come to similarly opposite conclusions following such vastly different experiences, yes? Well, this hour will indeed answer that. Now, since we've painted a playoff atmosphere here for tonight, and for the benefit of my guest and for listeners who may not be familiar with me here, I will first make my point and outlook brief yet unwavering. Amazingly, Edwin F. Becker's experience and mine both began on the very same day, the 25th of July, yet 9 years apart. I mean, how cool is that? Now, in my case, a couple of perfectly defining moments. My childhood best friend had been in a very bad accident, and he was brain dead when brought to the hospital. And at the moment of his death, when I was 21, he in Florida and me in New York, he came to visit, to tell me he wanted out. Not wanting to be fully dependent on others while strapped to breathing tubes as a vegetable, and he asked for my blessing on his wanting death. Now, I objected, but he made a very valid point, and I ultimately gave him my blessing, with the hope that perhaps he'd come to visit me after he died, which he did. Now, add to that visits from my wife's father a year after his passing, and my mother before her death while in a coma, and a few times since her passing earlier this year. And perhaps even more defining than all that, however, was a particularly rough time for me following an accident that left me in constant pain, even today. But this was years ago, at a time I was freshly adjusting to life in pain and rather failing at it. And I'll be honest with you, I wanted to die. I so wanted to die. I even prayed for death, and I was at a very low place. And eventually, I began somehow to sense dead people. They talked to me, shared things. Most of them were suicides or murder victims or folks who refused to accept that their lives were over. And these people, and yes, I think of them as people, actually lifted me up, brought me to a better place. Yes, these evil, demonic, ghastly suicide and murder victims lifted me up at my worst. Of course, I thought I was going mad, but I eventually discovered that some of them knew living people that I knew. And soon I discovered they would tell me things about these living that were true, that applied to them, that I could not have possibly known otherwise. Now, I called these tidbits of information affirmations and used them to prove that I was not crazy, at least to myself. Ultimately, I can say to you all here, friends and listeners, that the dead saved my life. So I owe them an honor, the unwavering vow to represent them in a good light. Now, though I'm now some years removed from the ability of mediumship, I learned a lot about the dead while able to do so, and that goes for ghosts, earthbound spirit, crossed over spirit, and even to some extent, residual energy, which also seems to have its own powers. And I have tried, friends, in earnest, to tell people, especially in the field of paranormal investigations, that these are not toys. These are not things to use to give yourself some fear-spiked adrenaline rush, nor to ever taunt or treat like some circus act to pose for pictures or show off with flashlights or say things like, you cannot follow us home in the name of Jesus Christ, or automatically assume that they're demonic or out to hurt you, but to see them as people who lived good lives, loved others, gained wisdom, and often built from their own blood and sweat the homes that we now live in, visit, or even investigate, either for idle curiosity, for the studio audience, or to feel like the winner of a truth or dare wager. But in their eyes, you are in their homes on their time, and without any hint of respect from you, how do you think they'd feel? In all candor, friends and listeners, it's a hardship trying to paint a kind picture of ghosts. Often it falls on deaf ears, often keeps me from being asked to speak on the matter, even in events thrown by friends. But it is my calling for which I'm honored to answer, and I do hold hope on high that my words will be heard by true professionals in the paranormal realm. Now, mediums are different, and often I see a divide between paranormalists and mediums. The mediums feel like, well, why go out for a hamburger when you got steak at home? These folks can communicate with spirit without even leaving their seats, and fail to see why others would seek out energies, especially that are likely despondent, sad, angry, upset, or stuck, and have usually found a very nurturing, loving method of dealing with those no longer with us. I almost see now a daily case to make for the thought that instead of ghosts or haunting dead spirits, perhaps in some of these locations, we're actually seeing living people, but in a time warp. And there are now astrophysics to back that idea. When space warps, so does time. So perhaps we have audience with living people from the 1860s or 1910s or whenever. I also know mediums who work in very dark places, friends like Jackie Barrett or Amy Allen from TV's Dead Files, who risk themselves in service to us, and I think them angels, really doing work where angels fear to tread. So, do I think evil does not exist, or there's no such thing as demons? Of course not. Where there's good, there's evil. Where there's light, there's dark, and so forth. Yet I absolutely and vehemently disagree with those who think it's always evil or demonic. To me, it speaks very unkindly to those in spirit who may be around. So here and now, we have tonight a wonderful man, Edwin F. Becker, who has lived some of the most horrid, traumatic, soul-sucking experiences in our realm with the very same elements of paranormal. He did not ask for it, and for the longest time even think that ghosts were in his midst, but they indeed were, and he and his wife, Marcia, had been put through the ringer, and he has seen up close and firsthand the factions of malevolence, perhaps even demonic, After all, his first dream house became the worst dream, ending in an exorcism that was televised for NBC in the 1970s, early on, right around the time of the film The Exorcist being such a huge hit. So it seems as though I have someone who may disagree with my gentle outlook toward these energies, and time to hear his side. First, though, a quick nod to his magnificent book, True Haunting, which I wholeheartedly recommend to anyone and everyone, even casually interested in the paranormal, or what it's like to endure a haunting, and also highly praise Edwin F. Becker for resisting the temptation to exaggerate, embellish, trump up, glorify, glamorize, or digress from anything other than a diary of the events that occurred from his historical perspective, in which this paranormal realm has been more the rule than the exception, to elaborate or glamorize the real from the made-for-Booker TV nonsense that has stained this realm for decades. All right, the host team has now spoken. So now I introduce with the greatest honor this wonderful man who endured unimaginable hardship and with gentle and eloquent manner will make his case through his experiences for the guest team, Edwin F. Becker. A very good evening, Edwin, and a most warm welcome to you. We so proudly welcome you to Beyond the Norm tonight.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, Chip.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time, playoff scenario or not. But in this playoff scenario, I think you, truly, one of the most qualified people now living to share with us an understanding of these energies. And while I'd love to know the extent to which we differ in opinion, there's so many questions in so little time. So first and briefly, I'll ask you if you'd be so kind as to tell us a little bit about your experiences with them, if you could, and briefly revisit what happened to you and your wife when you first purchased that home back in 1970, especially when you really began to realize you had ghosts.
Well, it wasn't like I was looking for a haunted house because they didn't exist
No,
in 1970.
Nope.
I bought a ramshackled old place because it was what I could afford. It was out of desperation in a very old neighborhood, a neighborhood where the houses were built in buildings in the 1890s, where they held funerals in the house. And I mean, today I look back in retrospect, and I wonder how many of those buildings don't have some type of activity.
Oh, right.
But I bought the house, and I was a bullheaded, ignorant young man. I mean, I grew up in the streets of Chicago, and ghosts were not anything to be afraid of in 1970.
Yeah. Well, you were a little street smart at the time, so you'd had some experiences probably with the living that would pale in comparison, I think, to the non-living.
Marcia, who's on the line, she's got a terrible cold, but she is more sensitive, and she was more sensitive at her young age than I was. Mm-hmm. I was afraid of people. I mean, they could hurt you.
Yeah, they sure could.
So, you know, the initial activity, I believe spirits are just so very intelligent, and as ignorant as I was, this building was owned by a single family, and unlike today, families in those years had a sense of domain that we don't have. Yeah. You know, you or I are going to pack it up and go to Florida, or pack it up and go here or there. Like I just moved from Branson to Springfield, no problem. In those years, if people bought a building, they imagined that their children would live there, their grandchildren would live there, and
all right.
And so they had a strong attachment to this building. Besides being batshit crazy, plain English, the family was. And of course, what I did as a young man was I declared war, because going in, what I inherited was an apartment that a fellow had died in, and they liquidated the building as an heir estate. It had been ransacked, and it looked like vandals had hit it. I mean, chairs were cut open, and stuff was all over the floor, and I just called in a second-hand store and said, take it all. You know, not thinking that there could be somebody there that cares about any of these items.
Yeah. You know, I as a fellow married man, you know, not happily for a long time like yourself, so this is a husband-wife thing, and I know you touched on it a little bit a couple of minutes ago. I know your wife, Marcia, had some intuitions early on, such as an instant fear of the basement, for example, as I read in the book. But who do you think really got it first, you or she?
Oh,
And that-
she
there
got
it
Oh,
goes.
me.
yeah, no.
Oh,
No,
even with
I'm-
the cold, see, she speaks.
Yeah, Marcia got it first, and I number one, I didn't believe. I rationalized everything or ignored it, and number two, when I did confront something that I couldn't rationalize or reason or logic out, I basically said that whatever it was, it's her problem because she just had a baby. She's going through chemistry changes. She's locked up in a house.
Yeah.
I thought she was going a little bit off center.
Yeah, well, hell hath no fury, like a hormonal,
Well, for the listeners out there, spirits are intelligent, and I'm sure that they sized me up pretty quickly, and they understood that she could sense them, and I couldn't. And it created a point of friction instantly between us, because when she started telling me about objects moving and about simple little things that were happening, I basically said, BS. You're imagining things.
Oh, sure.
And then it even got to the point to where I started to wonder, is she okay?
Yeah.
They took it fire, and they worked on our relationship. And her and I we're soulmates. We're going to be married 48 years shortly.
Congratulations. That's beautiful.
We met and ran away together the day we met. I was a traveling musician. I met her, and we touched hands, and we knew. Made me a strong believer in reincarnation, by the way.
Oh, excellent. What was your instrument, if you don't mind my asking, one musician to another?
Bass, and then I played the organ and some guitar, rhythm guitar.
Oh, wow. So you could be a one-man traveling show, should you want, if you could carry all that stuff around back then.
All of us could. There were five of us, and between the five of us, I think we played 12 instruments. Nice. So we had a valve trombone and a saxophone and a trumpet and a church organ and guitars and a bass. And we put on quite, and all five were singers, so we were booked in some of the best. In fact, the club I met Marcia in was the only club in Tulsa in 1967 that brought in out-of-town bands. So we were kind of a big deal in those years, traveling wise.
Now, I got a question for you that's a little off script, but not much, because you at least are insinuating that she kind of got it before you did, to answer my last question.
Definitely.
So and I can see why they would try to kind of work to split you two, because this, as a living family, was not the kind of people that kind of were loving and nurturing to each other. So it's kind of what they know. But at the same time, because she kind of understood that it may have been something supernatural, and you really were dead set against thinking that, do you think the approach with them to her and them to you was different?
Definitely.
Does that make sense?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I did sense all the, in my book, in fact, I list them in the back of the book, all the various signals they may send you. And, I'm preaching to the choir because I'm sure you know them all.
Yeah.
But, your little hairs will go up in the back of your neck. You'll feel a definite, you don't need a thermometer to sense the temperature change. You'll feel a temperature change. You'll hear a ringing in your ears. You might feel instant agitation. You'll certainly feel like somebody's looking at you. You're being watched for some reason. Sometimes the air will be heavy, like you could be in an open room with an open window, but yet that air will feel stale and heavy.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it'll be an unfamiliar odor that just doesn't belong.
Yep.
But so it sent me a lot of these signals. But frankly, I grew up with a dysfunctional family, and I lived in the terrible parts of the city and in basements and stuff, and none of these signals had I not felt before. So I sort of attributed to them to, maybe a tinge of, call it fear, maybe a tinge of unfamiliarity. But I certainly never felt I was at home.
Yeah.
Your home has a feeling I always felt.
I get that.
We were there.
I get that. I actually learned from the Oprah show, of all things, back in the day when she was like brand new. She had a security expert that told her and all of us to trust that feeling in the pit of your gut, because it was designed for us before electricity, or when we were living in made homes. When you're in the dark, in the woods, and there is a predatory animal behind you, stalking you for dinner, that's what that pit of the gut feeling is from. And to trust that. And this in a day and age where everybody was, naysaying against that sort of thing. And I like how you brought that up here. And I also like, the list. I mean, I've read the list in the back of the book, and I think you could actually use that as a teaching tool for a lot of people that, are kind of new to the realm and want to work like investigations or curiosities. I think it's an excellent list. And I also love and absolutely recommend the book, True Haunting. Now, you said there was a family that owned the house you bought and had been there since it was built. And you mentioned a little bit about them, but can you share with us some history and traits of the family as when they were alive, the kind of people that they were?
Well, my first exposure was the day I did a walkthrough on the house, and that was to the daughter, who was the last remaining member of the family, who resided on the first floor. Mm-hmm. And it was brutal. I mean, she came out, I couldn't tell, I was 24, I couldn't tell whether she was 60 or 80 or 50, but she was, if anybody in the audience had seen Paranormal Witness, okay, the Myra that they used was lovable compared to the real one.
Wow, no
this
kidding.
Woman had, she had gray hair sticking out. It was matted and filthy. She cuddled a real dirty poodle on her shoulder, which I swear Marcia and I never figured out whether it was supposed to be gray or white.
Oh, man.
It was biting at her hair, and she swore like a sailor. I mean, she just opened up and swore at me and the real estate man, and he gave it back to her. And when it was all done, I was in shock, and he said to me, "It's the only way you can deal with her. She's just crazy. She's insane."
Yeah, and in 1970, you just didn't do that, especially like ladies, did not do that, even though she was never really portrayed as a lady, either in the book or for the TV show. But I kind of like their casting in that choice, even though you said that she pales in comparison to the real one. It was along the lines of what I imagined by your writings.
That woman was clean and she was huggable. I mean, compared to... and then my next exposure was the basement when after we took possession, Marcia wouldn't go down there. She felt it instantly. Mm-hmm. I always felt like I was being watched, but I felt that during my life. It wasn't a fearful feeling to me. Mm. But I popped the lock, my brother and I, on this wooden shed. It was actually made out of planks, but they were kind of rudimentary storage lockers. And there it was, all this early pornography and craziness. He had these nudist books, and he had other books, but the main thing that affected me, and even my 14-year-old brother was shocked, was piles of shoe boxes with very neatly stacked, all marked with his name on it. They all had about 2-inch to 3-inch thick big piles of cutouts that were rubber band, like baseball cards, and they were filled. Thousands and thousands. There could have been 100,000 for all I know.
Yeah, with scantily clad women.
We started opening up the boxes thinking they can't all be this, and yes, they were. Yeah. And when we unbanded them, what they weren't like articles or things that people would collect. They were body parts of women. Mm. And it didn't matter if it was a photograph or a cartoon. He would cut it out very neatly, approximately the same size, and he had thousands. From what I could tell, they went back to maybe the 20s. Mm. But I just wanted it all out of there. And, so my first take, before I even decided we had ghosts or even acknowledged that, was that these people were crazy. Yeah. And then when I saw the room, the Paranormal Witness did have it right, and it looked like this was a raised building. It was built on the ground, and then they raised it up on cinder blocks, and they put a basement in it that was very rough shod basement, but it was a basement. And the front wall ended in a panel, but I saw a hasp on the wall. Pulled the hasp, and the panel opened, and there was a room. And this whole basement was just a frickin' mess. It had an old coal chute in it. It had coal on the floor. It had oil. It had garbage and crap. But in this front room, they had linoleum on the floor. They had an army wood-burning stove. They had a bed couch. They had a chair, a table, like someone was in there, lived in there. But I didn't tell my brother because he already had the heebie-jeebies walking through there. He felt it right away.
That's funny. You mentioned you and your younger brother came across some like pornography at first, and I would have been like, jackpot. But you got the creepy feeling, which kind of, gives you credit for your intuition. And of course, granted it, yeah, I mean, and I actually like the way that Paranormal Witness did your case, especially in regard to having read the book first, because it just didn't seem as over the top as I would have expected it to be, because this whole thing was, I mean, in the case of every malevolent haunting that I have seen to date, about as over the top normally as anything I'd ever seen. And so they actually kind of underplayed a little bit almost. And I was kind of surprised by that.
Well, we don't have all that much time, but there's a whole story behind the Paranormal Witness, and that was I refused to be on it. And I had never talked in public before, so that was the first time I ever spoke in public. And it wasn't for my granddaughters, who were now preteens and teens. They're sci-fi crazy, so they were going to disown me if I didn't go on Paranormal Witness.
Well, sure, you got to do it for the kids.
And I made them move their production team from Boston to St. Louis. My daughter had to drive me there, and I was very sensitive to the fact that I knew that they're making good TV and entertainment, and they did take some liberties as far as playing scenes behind our words that didn't exactly match what we were saying. But they did try to keep close to the book.
Yeah.
And the Mark Lewis was the actual producer of this show. They were editing that thing. It was supposed to be 42 minutes. It turned out to be the season finale, 63 minutes. And they kept in touch with me all the way until 3 weeks before it aired.
Wow.
As far as, Ed, we're going to make this change, Ed, we're going to make that change. And because I didn't want to look like a fool. Marcia and I spent a couple of years in 1970 being told we were nuts.
Sure.
So I have a very sensitive skin when it comes to that.
I believe that. And you did not look stupid at all or nuts or anything. And it's kind of what I noticed most of all when I watched the episode and watched you talk about these experiences is you could see it in your eyes, because I know you as a gentle sort of guy, I admire that, but in your eyes you can kind of see the sinking feeling all over again, as if you were experiencing for the first time. Now, this question,
when I meet other authors, that's how I can tell. When I met Stephen LaChance, all I had to do was shake his hand and look in his eyes, and I know that his book is real.
Yeah.
When I met Chris Cesare, the same thing.
Yeah. Oh boy.
You can see it in his eyes, and you can see the pain, and you're not telling your story. It's not a giggle fest, and this happened and that happened. Marcia and I felt a lot of pain, and on Paranormal Witness, I stopped the camera. I was on for a day and a half of the interview. I stopped the camera 3 times. It brought tears to my eyes because of things I just couldn't talk about or cope with,
Yeah.
My relationship with Marcia deteriorated. My sister wound up following a dark road afterward, and there were some things that were very painful to me.
Oh, yeah.
And people, you and I traded some comments about this on Facebook, but the people who go out looking for these things just for the hell of it are idiots. And when they tell me, I got protection, my answer is, can I say bullshit? Because, if I'm close to my God, and I love God, and I pray every day and every night, but I think if I walk into a tiger's cage thinking that Jesus is going to protect me, he's going to be sitting up there laughing his butt off saying, what an idiot I created. You're going out looking for trouble, and I'm supposed to protect you. I don't see the logic in that. I do see the logic in people like yourself and some of these investigators who help people and who, if they're dealing with the human factor, God, I wish that was available in 1970.
Oh, sure.
If the Order of Exorcists, Archbishop Ron Fale, and some of the investigators we know, they deal with the people and they try to eliminate the fear and get them to understand much like the exorcist and the psychic did to me, they altered my behavior. They taught me not to be, I was a smartass. So I was, much like in the book, I was antagonizing it. Mm-hmm. I was calling it an airbag. I'd make fun of it, I mean, something that can move an ashtray or a mixer, that ain't that frightening to me. Yeah. Now, if the refrigerator moves, now I'm scared.
Right. I just love the way you put these things.
So I'd be swearing at it and cursing at it and tying the door. I did tie the door shut and agitated it, and Marcia would start crying, because she had an idea what I was messing with. I didn't. Mm. If there was somebody physical, I'd punch it in the nose. It was like, come on down. I was pissed, and when the exorcist and the psychic got a hold of me, they said, no, you are doing it really, really wrong, and this is not how you approach this situation.
Right. And, for 1970, for Marcia to even have a general idea, I mean, that says a lot, because very few people knew anything about ghosts in 1970. We couldn't talk about it out in the open. There weren't many books about it. And if there were, they weren't in any of the town libraries. You'd have to know, like a black market friend or something.
Yeah, there were no stories. I mean, there's a lot of people in the paranormal community that are kind of upset with me because here I come along with a story that predates all these other stories. Mm. I'm sorry for that, but and really my daughter should have took the beating, because the book was supposed to be in my daughter's name, because I didn't want to show my face in the paranormal community. I didn't know it was so warm. I mean, number one, the paranormal community at its core is a very warm community.
At its core, it is.
I expected skepticism and ridicule, which I've seen very little, if any. So I was pleasantly surprised. But I hid like a monk, because I didn't want I refused all the initial radio interviews, because I figured they're going to bring me on, they're going to roast me. And, boogeyman and stuff like that. That's what we heard in 1970.
Sure.
And we experienced, I mean, it almost tore our marriage apart, and we're soulmates. Yeah. It drove Marcia home. Yep. And I had to go back and get her and tell her we're going to solve this some way. And it's not something, these energies are, I mean, as well as I, if you walk into a room that's occupied. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe you can see what's occupying it. I can't. Yeah. And neither can most of these investigators. And they don't know whether it's a teddy bear or a tiger. Yeah. Yeah. And they're going to go in there, and they're going to, like some of these fools who yell at it and, this, that, and the other. Yeah. I know what it can do, and I know the harm. I don't seek out these things.
No, you don't. But I should point out what Chris DeCesare, our mutual friend and former guest here of the show, said about you. Because of you, he had like a soft place to land as somebody who had experienced a malevolent haunting. And for him, it was 1985 as a college student. And this sets a precedent for him, something to follow. And he is very appreciative of that. And knowing Chris as well as I do, as well as we do, it speaks volumes to you. So we are glad, albeit hesitantly, that you are in this realm. I want to ask a quick question about the exorcism, and then some specific questions about the energies, which I think you are more qualified to answer than just about anyone alive. But how did the TV network first come to hear about your case, and was it their idea to get a priest involved, or yours?
It wasn't mine, because I was kicked out of the parish once the priest tried to bless our home and had difficulty. And I went back and tried to get them to redo it. They just kicked me out. And I got angry, and we had words, and I said some things I shouldn't have said. And so that was done. The psychic, it was Joe DeLuise, who was a lifelong friend until he passed in 2008. Mm. He sensed a number of entities. He knew that one of them was very, very dark. So he wanted a exorcist, someone who may be able to deal with something that he couldn't deal with as a medium.
Now, was this Ben or the younger kid who was in the closet bound? Which one, in your opinion, would that have been? Or neither?
I think it was the younger one. myself, but you never get formally introduced. I had a medium tell me that she didn't think it was the family at all. And she thought it was the original landowners that drove everybody crazy.
Oh, interesting.
And since I had some things that weren't in the book that she didn't know about, that kind of made sense too. But Joseph DeLuise was rather prominent in 1970 because he was involved in the Manson thing and had located Tex Watson. And
all right.
So I was lucky to find him, and he lived in Chicago. Marcia actually found him. And author Tom Valentine, who's still writing. They came, they checked us out, our credentials, they checked out my background and everything to make sure that we weren't, tripping on LSD or something. And they said, whoa, it's for real. And they contacted a Father Joe Wood, who had an NBC radio program. He was a Catholic priest. But he said he couldn't do it because of the protocol. He said he'd have to go through this maze of bureaucracy. He might get approval 2 years from now. So he recommended an Anglican priest, William Darrell Davis, and they got involved. And then what happened, I guess, this is all an assumption on my part.
Okay.
All I can imagine is that probably Father Wood, who did believe Joseph and had great faith in him, felt that this was something that might be. He called NBC, as he worked for NBC, and then I knew I got a phone call from Carol Simpson, who is still our friend today, to this day.
Nice. That's awesome.
And she is just a sweet lady. And again, I was afraid of, you're going to call me crazy, you're going to make fun of me on TV, and I didn't need that. She handled it very, very well, but she said, will you do this? And I said, no. And Tom Valentine, the author who wrote Joe's book, Psychic Mission, he said, will you please do it? Because, it might help Joe's sales. Well, they did spend days at our place and hours with me. And I couldn't say no. So I asked Carol, can you film it without Marcia and me being in it? And she said, no, we have to see the owners. So I said, okay. And that's, NBC just knew something significant was there. And they had cameras there for 2.5 days. They rolled around 16 hours of film.
Wow.
Piece, you can see the piece on YouTube, what's left of it. It in Chicago, it played as a news piece. They played it about 100 times. And it took up, of what was 24 minutes of news in those years because of commercials, it took up 6.5 minutes. They didn't give the president that much time in 1970.
Right.
And then they used it as a segment of their program First Tuesday, which showed out of Illinois. We couldn't see it, but it was a 20-minute segment of on First Tuesday, which was competing with 60 Minutes at the time. And of course, 60 Minutes won.
Yeah, it is kind of surprising now. You would think that an exorcism would even beat out 60 Minutes. I love the fact that you're still friends with Carol. It goes to the journalistic integrity from journalists in the 1970s. They weren't pressed on too much information back then. They kept some things close to the vest.
Carol surprised us because she was from the South. She had a very spiritual upbringing, and in fact, I read her book, News Lady. She would have probably been on Paranormal Witness had she not been on a book tour, on her own book. But I wrote her and asked her, did you remember us? And she wrote Marcia and I back, and she said, remember you? She said, 100,000 pieces she did in her career. She said, yours is the one I'll remember the most.
Wow.
And it really touched her, and much like in the book, I had eventually lied to her because she kept calling and wanted to know if we're okay. Are you okay? Is everything, And I told Marcia, we can't let her keep calling. We're not okay, but, what can she do?
Right. Right. But it also goes to show your integrity, and I think that's what brings back fond memories for her, even though, it's not a story, really. Stories are people experiencing things, and I think in this case, knowing you, it had to have been really more about the people. Now, I got to ask specific questions now. I've got a couple of more categories here, and I want to try to get as much through as possible because, again, you're the most qualified to answer these. And before we get into particular conclusions about ghost spirits and investigative method, or it's the stigma that surrounds them, I want to ask a checklist of things. Quickly kind of ask the things that you either went through or didn't go through. So as I ask you each, please tell us whether you saw these firsthand or not.
Sure.
First on the list, did you see or experience, and you kind of already said yes, items moving about the house on their own? And can you tell us about a little bit of that briefly?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Marcia's much better.
Marcia!
I experienced it, but Marcia
I
saw
lived it.
way more than I did.
Yeah.
They played with her more because while I was at work, she'd be holed up in the kitchen as a fortress. So tell them some of the things you saw briefly,
please.
as quick as you can.
You name it, the mixer flying, the dishes flying, things moving out of place, doors opening and closing. My broom would be on one side of the room. I'd put it and it'd be on another. My child's toys being moved around, which she thought was great fun.
I'm sure.
But I'd hear her giggle and a look in the playroom, and she was never more than a few feet away from me.
Now, I have to ask, because I saw the Paranormal Witness episode, and
Right.
I saw, like, for example, some dishes flying.
Oh, yes.
And it begs the question, the way they portrayed these dishes flying about, how close to reality was that?
They took big liberty there because
Okay.
first of all, we couldn't afford China dishes. we had what you get.
Melmac, yeah.
You'd buy $20 worth of groceries, you get a free plate at the store. They call it melamine, but it was plastic.
Right.
So they would have been like Frisbees. But yeah, it did move stuff out of the cupboard, and not like it showed. And
No, the door would fly open the opposite direction that it leaned.
And Marcia didn't scream like that.
No.
Now she screams like that at me.
No,
But
shut up.
Well, after 48 years, that's what happens.
Except for the bathtub scene. That was very, very, they did that almost perfectly.
Wow.
And yeah, because Joseph said they can't touch you. Well, I found out the hard way they can
They could,
touch you.
sure. Yeah. And that was one of the most chilling things in the whole piece.
It truly changed me.
we got to hit your list. Okay, let's.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm watching the clock.
Next up, apparitions. Transparent,
Yes.
full, both? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes. All the above.
All the above.
The solid one is probably the one that affected me the most. Both of us, I guess, but it really affected me because it wasn't frightening. It was a sincere-looking, very sad old woman.
Ah.
And Marcia and I both saw her. I saw her. I had seen her a number of times, and I didn't realize what she was.
Wow.
So I said to Marcia, I said, do you see her? We were at the top of the stairs, and Marcia said, yeah. So later I found out she didn't belong to our first floor tenants. She was an apparition. But if I had her picture today and I sent you one, you'd say it's the picture of an old woman. There was nothing,
Spooky about her. No.
nothing
Yeah.
spooky about it. There were no flames shooting out of her ears or anything like that.
Oh, but to be in full and not transparent is, that's so rare.
Well, she was.
Was your experience that apparitions are like 3D pictures and rarely able to respond directly to you, or do you think them intelligent, or both?
I think they're intelligent.
I think they're intelligent.
Yeah. They responded to us.
Because
Did they?
the one thing I did do is I borrowed a tape recorder. I have the whole exorcism, 3.5 hours on sound tape.
Wow.
And Marcia and I listened to it recently, but every time I would try to record, Marcia and I would hear audible arguing, and so did our tenants on the first floor.
Oh, yeah. Violent argument.
If you saw Paranormal Witness Dan White, our first floor tenant, showed up after I wrote the book, and he told us of his experience, and we both heard audible arguing.
Right. Dan.
But every time I'd hit record, it would stop.
Right.
Yeah.
So
We
I
can
knew
see it
that
in
They could
Dan's
either read
eyes,
my
too.
mind or they could see me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess you just answered the next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's worded a little differently, and I wonder what you think of this wording about residual apparitions. In other words, events in time replayed as if live, like
Yes.
people arguing, rather than a person. So you had those experiences,
Yes.
or if
Yeah.
not you, then
Yes.
the neighbors did. Did both
Yeah.
you and the neighbors have them, or was it just Dan that experienced that?
No, it was our first floor tenants and ourselves.
And ourselves. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I'd ask effects on batteries or electricity, but you've answered that. How about shadow figures?
Yes.
I see them all the time.
Yes.
And when you're a non-believer, it's not like a shadow figure. I'm not saying they won't or they can't or it's impossible because we're talking paranormal, but it ain't going to confront you and walk up in your face.
Right.
You're going to see it out of the corner of your eye. You're going to see a blink of it on the wall, and then it's going to be gone. And it was all the time. It was, in the basement. It was on the first floor.
All the time. Yeah.
Wow.
You'd see these things, and I get the feeling a lot of times it was behind me, and your fight or flight mechanism kicks in, so my adrenaline would start to rush, and I'd turn around to expect somebody to be there, and nobody's there.
Yeah.
How about mists? Did you
I'm
ever
sorry,
have
mists?
mists?
More of a feeling than a sight.
No,
Okay.
no mists.
Thick air.
Air would get heavy.
Yes.
And it's the only way I could put it.
Very heavy.
It's like it's not like you can't breathe, like you're losing oxygen, but you could feel that there's maybe less oxygen or stale or.
Oh, I've felt that. And I think a lot of the listeners have been in positions where the air is heavy, and that's about the only way you can describe it.
Yeah.
And most people don't get it unless they've been in heavy air.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, it had such an effect on me that I gave people in the chat room the YouTube link.
Oh, nice.
I can't watch that YouTube link. I can't watch that whole piece because
I don't
I
blame
start
you.
to smell that room, and I smell it's like a PTSD, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it becomes visceral. I mean, it's like
Yes.
reliving it all over again. All right. Now I'm going to ask you three things that we've had former guests about that specialized in that have been a bit controversial in our realm these last few years. First up, orbs, especially in pictures. And
Definitely.
what's your personal take on orbs now? Do you think them valid or conjecture? And if there's
Valid.
anything particular that qualifies what you would think is a real orb as opposed to dust or a photo anomaly?
I've got a pretty good person who takes care of my photography and people that send us stuff. My daughter is a professional photographer. She's done magazine layouts and she does all that stuff. And when people send me photos, I quickly send them to her. And then 99 times out of 100, she'll send me back a family photo with the same anomaly in it.
She can recreate
In other
it.
words, she recreates it.
Oh, wow.
But the one thing she cannot create, and I've got some on my Facebook page, is a picture where there's one or two orbs.
Right.
If you have one or two, that's not going to be dust. She can create orbs with dust and with different things, but they're always clusters or there's lots of multiples.
Huh. That's
And how can
fascinating.
it's not going to be that big. One particle of dust is not going to be that huge.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's usually around us or on us.
Yeah, that's another good point. Okay, next up, and I have a little problem with some of this stuff. Scratching. Has it ever happened to you? And if you got scratched, were there
Yeah.
any
I never
patterns? Was
did.
it always in threes, or was it
I
just
did.
scratches?
Yeah.
Was it always in threes, or did you have 3 or 4 or 1 or 2, or were they always different?
It would vary. It could be 1, it could be 3.
Yeah, if I could ever get Dan White to be on a radio show, he'd tell you.
Oh, sure.
He was
That's right.
scratched. He was really scratched.
Right.
Okay, now, Marcia, I must ask you then, because here's where my thing is. Would you personally think it possible to be scratched and it not be in malice? And I ask because I've on several occasions see some people get scratched, like unintentionally, sometimes because the energy had somebody's attention and then lost it and was kind of trying to guide them back to a
Could be.
dialogue, misjudged
Yeah.
the strength. So it's possible then. I mean,
Yes,
what's
I
your-
definitely believe this. I think almost anything is possible. But yes, I don't think everything is malice. And so, yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, God bless you for that, first of all. And by the way, I haven't formally greeted you. It's such a pleasure and honor to have you on the program with
Oh,
us.
thank you.
All right. Now, next up, how about demons? Have you seen these things as demons? Do you think any difference between an angry spirit and a demon?
Definitely.
Yeah. If you have to ask the question, you never met a demon.
Definitely difference. Yes.
A lot of these investigators will say, well, it's demonic or blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, if you have to make a judgment, a demon has so much more power
There's no question.
And it's so much more destructive, and it's not going to be controlled. And, you know, what you need to have on your show is Archbishop Ron Fale, who's a true exorcist, and he could talk about demons. And I've got a book called Banished, where it's as close as you can get to understanding a demon, maybe. They don't spit pea soup at you.
Yeah, right.
but they can't throw the refrigerator or dresser at you.
Yeah.
So that activity would have impressed me, even as a young man.
Okay, we've got like 7 minutes here. So one last question about yes or no, and then some conclusion questions, and then we'll ask, contact information and things like that.
Sure.
Out of a personal curiosity, I have this theory now about time warps. How do you feel about the possibility of these energies sometimes actually being time warps or interdimensional crossovers, where it's living people from another time rather than dead people in spirit? Would any time in your experience make any sense to you, considering the possibility of a time warp rather than somebody stuck in spirit?
Well, being as paranormal, I won't eliminate anything, but I can't go into in detail my personal experience, but I've died a few times. And the last time I died was a year and a half ago on the table here in Springfield, and they had to start my heart. And what happened was I went into V-tachycardia, and they gave me a charge, and my heart just went dead. That was it. And then they all panicked and kept striking me and charging the hell out of me until I came back. Well, I didn't know it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I saw everything that was going on. I saw the panic. I saw the people. I saw everything. I came out of it, and I was mad. And my youngest daughter, said, "What's the matter, Dad?" And I said, "They kept asking my damn name." And I kept yelling. I'm yelling, Ed Becker, Ed Becker, Ed Becker, Ed Becker, Ed Becker. And she said, "Dad, you were unresponsive."
Wow.
And I said, "That's impossible," because I saw the guy with the red scrub. I saw the guy and all those things. Well, now it makes me think, if they didn't restart my heart, was I a ghost at that point?
Wow.
'Cause I've had another near death where I died earlier in my life, which was entirely different. But I didn't see the light, and I didn't see any of the feelings of euphoria that I felt the first time I passed away. This time was just like I was still present. And so I think that some of these spirits are people that don't know or didn't go and are still here for whatever reason.
Okay. Well, you answered one of my conclusion questions, whether you see these energies as people or not, as I was vehement about in my editorial. And I should ask, since it's with this whole playoff scenario that we set up, you heard my editorial in the beginning, knowing my experiences have been so vastly different than yours. And I ask you to be honest and candid with me. Do you think my personal outlook naive or unrealistic at all?
No.
I think it real.
No, not at all. In fact,
I think it real, very real.
I think one of the things that I immediately liked about you was your respect for these entities.
Right.
Because I believe they are real people. I'm not Clouseau, so I can't tell you why they're here and how they wound up here. But when Marcia and I run into an entity now, and we have in looking at houses and things, and we've been used by our friends to see if their houses are clean.
Right.
My feeling is when I run into one, I pray and I say, "God bless you. I'm sorry I intruded in your space."
Right.
See, that's how I do it. Usually, in an attempt to communicate, I'll apologize to them, let them know I'm just passing through. I don't want to impose on them. I let them know I can't see or hear them directly and apologize for that. There's no disrespect here, and if there's anything you'd care to say or tell me, please do. It's all about respect. Now, I have to ask the question about, after what you've endured, you're probably most qualified to answer. To what percentage, and this is a tough question, honestly, would you think ghosts or residuals or even apparitions to be evil or specifically guided to hurt or malice?
I actually think it's a small percentage. I think there's, in fact, Marcia, in my experience, we've never hunted ghosts after Campbell Street. We ran away.
I believe that.
But we've experienced travelers. We've experienced many travelers that pass through.
Yeah.
And much like I said, when I bought that building in the 1890s, they had funerals in these buildings. There's probably a lot of them that are occupied, and I get tons of emails. I got a 2-foot stack of them where people relate to something in the book, and they say, that's happening at my house. The closet door will open by itself. And the first thing I ask them, does it scare you? If it doesn't scare them, then I tell them, ignore it. Say a prayer and ignore it.
Wow.
Well,
Hey,
they have to understand they're trying to get your attention.
They just want your
Yeah.
attention
Right.
or whatever.
For one
I
reason
think-
or another.
Yeah, the
Right.
evil ones. If the evil ones were out there in numbers, all these investigators would be wearing Depends. You know.
That's true. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left, and the most important question of all is contact question. Where can people find more about you, about your books, and all that good stuff?
www.edwinbecker.com.
No middle initial?
Or www.truehaunting.com.
For the book.
And all my books are on Amazon, and I take great pride. I'll answer every single email. Even if you write it and you tell me that the book sucks, I'm going to answer your email.
Well, I'll have a review up tomorrow, by the way. And I so highly recommend the book, and both of you. Has been such an honor. Do you have any events upcoming, or are you just kind of laying low through this kind of stuff?
No, I don't do. I'm lazy. I don't do any events. I don't do any book signings. I don't do anything. I do some radio, and that's about it. I just enjoy. I enjoy communicating with people on Facebook and emails and telephone.
Well,
We
we
do
enjoy
help a lot of
communicating with you.
people.
You know, the amazing thing is I'll be on your program tonight, and someone's going to play it 2 months from now and write me an email that they heard me on your program and ask me some questions. How small our world has become.
Oh, I hear you.
Yeah,
I hope we can have you back on at some point. To
Anytime.
Oh, we'd love to.
Anytime.
I'd
We'd
love
love
to
it.
have you guys too. And we're out of time, and we can't thank you enough for giving us the golden hour and a paranormal playoff. I think it's a tie. I feel like a winner tonight, but only because I had the honor of having you on the show. We thank Edwin F. Becker, or Edwin Becker for the website, for being our honored guest, and his wonderful wife, Marcia. Join me each and every Monday night here on Beyond the Norm, and this broadcast will be made available on the A1B website's on-demand section within a couple of hours. Next week, the Year in Review. Danny Searle returns in January in a couple of weeks to talk about Soul Ages and his exciting new projects all the way from Australia. And in 2 weeks, we have genius physicist Thomas Fusco to show us how spirit energy applies in physics. Your brain might hurt afterward, but it's well worth it. Thanks for joining us for this very special